What if I told you that Rome's gladiators weren't just warriors? They were some of history's first drug-enhanced athletes? These men, fighting for their lives in front of tens of thousands of bloodthirsty spectators, downed strange potions of blood, ashes, and mysterious herbs to push their bodies beyond human limits. Imagine the roar of the Colosseum, as two men step forward not just armed with swords and shields, but chemically altered to withstand more pain, bleed less, and keep fighting longer than nature ever intended. Welcome to one of ancient Rome's strangest secrets, the gladiator's bizarre relationship with performance enhancers. Forget steroids and modern doping scandals. This is the raw, bloody origin of athletes bending the rules of biology itself. In today's Nutty history dive, we're peeling back the layers of myth and medicine to uncover how these superhuman warriors hacked their bodies with drugs, potions and diets that sound more like witchcraft than science, from herbal brews that promised endurance, to ashes that rebuilt bones, to whispers of blood rituals. You're about to learn how Rome's most famous fighters weren't just strong, they were engineered. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this: the scorching sun beating down on the Colosseum, 50,000 Romans screaming at the top of their lungs, and you, a gladiator, waiting for the gates to open. The smell of sweat, iron, and fear fills the air. You're about to step into an arena where most men don't leave alive, and here's the kicker: you're expected not just to fight, but to entertain. Gladiators were slaves, prisoners of war, or men condemned to death, trained to become Rome's ultimate spectacle. But unlike the modern image of quick duels to the death, many gladiatorial games lasted hours, sometimes even days. The fighters were expected to perform, not just win. That meant showing endurance, absorbing blows, bleeding dramatically but not too fatally, and keeping the crowd entertained until the final, suspenseful moment when a thumb pointed up or down decided their fate. Now imagine doing that multiple times a year. The average gladiator fought 2 to 3 times annually, and with survival rates surprisingly higher than most people think. Some gladiators became celebrities, drawing fans and betting money. To stay alive and profitable, they needed every possible edge, and that's where doping came in. Gladiators weren't just fed like soldiers, they were bred like racehorses. Trainers, physicians, and sometimes even shady healers experimented with concoctions to dull pain, boost strength, or make blood flow more dramatic for the crowd. It wasn't about fairness. Rome didn't care about fair fights. It was about survival and spectacle. So when we look at the strange blood doping practices of these men, we need to understand the context. Gladiators were professional athletes in the deadliest sport in history. If swallowing a potion of herbs, ashes, or even blood meant the difference between glory and death, would you hesitate? This is why doping wasn't just an accident of history. It was a necessity for Rome's most brutal entertainers. When most people picture a gladiator, they imagine a shredded warrior, all muscle and rage like a Hollywood action hero. But the truth? Gladiators weren't lean and cut, they were thick. Ancient writers even nicknamed them hordearii, meaning barley men. And no, that wasn't a compliment. Gladiators consumed diets heavy in barley, beans, and simple grains. Compared to the feasts of roasted meat and wine enjoyed by Rome's elites, this was peasant food. But there was method to the madness. That thick, carb-heavy diet packed on fat, which actually worked as armor. Imagine a sword slashing your side. Fat absorbed the blow better than muscle, buying gladiators precious seconds to keep fighting. It also made wounds more dramatic and bloody for the crowd, while still leaving fighters alive enough to fight another day. But here's where it gets stranger. Archaeological digs at gladiator cemeteries, like the site at Ephesus in modern-day Turkey, revealed that these men also consumed potions made of plant ash. Yes, actual ash from burned wood or bones. Why? Because ash contains calcium, magnesium, and other minerals that strengthened bones. Think of it like the Roman version of a post-workout protein shake, except instead of whey powder, you're gulping down a chalky sludge of ashes and vinegar, and it worked. Analysis of gladiator bones show they were unusually dense, almost like the bones of modern athletes who train with supplements. Stronger bones meant fewer fractures, fewer career-ending injuries, and more fights to bring in prize money. But that wasn't the only secret. Some gladiators were also believed to drink strange herbal tonics to dull pain or reduce fatigue. Ancient medical texts describe concoctions of poppy extracts, yes, opium, henbane, and even mandrake root, plants known for their hallucinogenic or pain-numbing effects. The line between medicine and poison was razor thin. Take just enough and you felt unstoppable. Take too much and you collapsed in the sand. So imagine it, a gladiator stepping into the arena, belly full of beans and barley, bones fortified by ash potions, veins buzzing with herbal stimulants. He wasn't just fighting on skill and muscle, he was fighting on chemistry. This was the first stage of gladiatorial doping, food and tonics designed not just to keep them alive, but to keep them spectacular. If you thought barley gruel and ash tonics were strange, buckle up, because gladiators weren't just fed like athletes, they were treated like ritual objects. And in Rome, that meant their diets sometimes blurred into the supernatural. One of the strangest Roman practices revolved around blood. The Romans believed that the blood of the fallen contained life energy, vitality, and even cures for disease. Some spectators at gladiator games, especially those suffering from epilepsy, were said to rush into the arena after a fight, trying to drink the warm blood of a freshly killed gladiator. Physicians of the time, including Scribonius Largus, actually prescribed gladiator blood as medicine. To the Romans, this wasn't grotesque, it was practical, and gladiators themselves. There are whispers in ancient sources that they might have occasionally consumed small amounts of animal blood, mixed with wine, as a sort of performance enhancer. Blood is rich in iron, after all, and iron boosts red blood cells, carrying more oxygen through the body. Sound familiar? That's basically the ancient equivalent of blood doping, a technique modern athletes were banned for centuries later. But blood wasn't the only body part the Romans eyed for strength. Ground bones, yes, powdered bones, sometimes found their way into gladiator diets and potions. Rich in calcium and minerals, bone dust was mixed into wine or vinegar, much like their ash drink. It was believed to knit their skeletons back together after brutal fights. Imagine gulping down a gritty, mineral-laced brew, hoping it would keep your ribs from snapping the next time a trident slammed into your chest. Then there was the element of magic. Romans were obsessed with charms and spells, and gladiators, being both feared and adored, often became tangled in this web of superstition. Some believed that consuming herbs tied to Mars, the god of war, granted a fighter divine ferocity. Others wore amulets or secretly ingested potions brewed by priests or sorcerers, recipes that included everything from wolf liver to snakeskin. To us, it sounds like witchcraft. But to a gladiator, who might not live past his next match, why not grab every edge you could? Whether through science, superstition, or sheer desperation, the arena became a laboratory of blood, bone, and magic. And the creepiest part? These early experiments paved the way for something even more advanced. Roman attempts at chemical endurance enhancement, centuries before modern drugs even existed. By now, you can see gladiators weren't just fighters. They were test subjects in a deadly mix of medicine, superstition, and survival. But here's where things get really nutty. Some Roman physicians may have been crafting primitive performance enhancers, concoctions designed to keep fighters swinging their swords longer than human limits should allow. The Romans were no strangers to chemistry. Apothecaries and physicians like Galen, the most famous doctor of the age, constantly experimented with plants, minerals, and animal parts to treat their patients. And when it came to gladiators, whose health directly impacted the profit of their lanista, trainer-owner, doctors had every incentive to push the boundaries. One recipe we know involved opium, extracted from poppies. While today we think of opium as a painkiller, in smaller doses it acted like a stimulant, numbing fatigue while still allowing a fighter to stay alert. It dulled pain just enough so that cuts and bruises wouldn't slow a gladiator down, but left him aggressive enough to keep going. Imagine facing a man in the arena who literally couldn't feel half the injuries you inflicted. Creepy, right? Other experiments leaned on plants like ephedra, an herb containing ephedrine, which acts similarly to modern amphetamines. It boosts heart rate, sharpens focus, and gives an adrenaline-like rush. Soldiers and hunters in other ancient cultures used it, and there's evidence Romans dabbled with it too. In a life-or-death arena fight, that burst of focus and speed could make all the difference. And then there were alcohol-based tonics, fermented brews laced with exotic herbs and spices. Some gladiators were given spiced wines infused with mandrake or henbane, plants that walk the thin line between medicine and poison. In tiny amounts, they heightened aggression and numbed pain. But too much? Hallucinations, madness, even death. It was the ultimate gamble. Boost your odds of victory. Or collapse in a delirious heap before the fight was done. These weren't random guesses either. Roman trainers and physicians kept careful notes, refining what worked and discarding what didn't. Over decades, they developed a shadowy knowledge base, a kind of proto-sports pharmacology that eerily foreshadows the doping scandals of modern athletics. But here's the kicker. These drugs didn't just change how gladiators fought, they changed how they died. Because while the crowd roared at seemingly unstoppable warriors behind the scenes, many of those men were slowly burning out their bodies with poisons disguised as medicine. And that sets us up for the next nutty twist. What happened when these substances went horribly wrong, leading to deaths that weren't caused by the sword, but by the potion? If the arena itself wasn't deadly enough, the so-called performance enhancers given to gladiators often turned the men into walking time bombs. Every potion, tonic, and strange brew promised strength, but the line between medicine and poison in ancient Rome was razor thin. Take mandrake, for example. This eerie, human-shaped root shows up in everything from Roman medical texts to later European witchcraft. In tiny doses, it could dull pain and spark bursts of aggression. But too much? Paralysis, hallucinations, even sudden death. Imagine a gladiator stepping into the arena, eyes wide with rage, only to collapse in convulsions before the fight even began. Then there was henbane, another popular plant. Roman doctors knew it made fighters feel invincible. Unfortunately, it also caused blurred vision, slurred speech, and at higher doses, total insanity. A few unlucky gladiators may have ended their last battle fighting phantoms in their own heads instead of their opponent in the sand. The same went for animal-based brews. Drinking blood or bone dust might have been seen as strengthening, but contaminated or improperly prepared, these substances could lead to horrific infections. And in a time without antibiotics, even a magical tonic could rot a gladiator from the inside out. Opium, meanwhile, was the double-edged sword of the arena. While it numbed pain, it also slowed breathing. Some fighters, after dosing, may have appeared calm and unshakable, only to collapse mid-bout, suffocating under the weight of their own dulled lungs. To the crowd, it might have looked like divine punishment. To the lanista, it was simply a bad investment. And let's not forget the psychological toll. Constantly swallowing strange brews, knowing they could kill you as easily as they could save you, created a sense of resigned fatalism. Gladiators weren't just gambling with the sword, they were gambling with their own biology. Here's the creepiest part. Historians suggest that some trainers intentionally pushed these doses too far. Why? A weakened or accidentally poisoned gladiator ensured a more dramatic fight for the crowd, and more drama meant more money. In other words, the drugs weren't just dangerous, they were part of the spectacle of death itself. But this nightmare cocktail of superstition, medicine, and greed had one more bizarre consequence. It turned gladiators into something larger than life, almost superhuman in the eyes of Roman society. The average gladiator was a man, flesh, blood, bone. But in the eyes of Roman society, these fighters seemed more than human. And much of that myth came not just from their skill, but from the strange potions and drugs that fueled their performances. Imagine sitting in a Roman amphitheater. You've traveled for days, spent your wages, and now you're here to witness the ultimate show. A gladiator strides into the arena, muscles gleaming with sweat, eyes burning with focus. He doesn't flinch at wounds. He doesn't seem to tire. Even when pierced, he fights on as if death itself is scared of him. To the roaring crowd, this wasn't just training. It looked like divine power, and that's exactly how Rome wanted it. Gladiators were woven into the empire's propaganda machine. Their resilience, amplified by strange diets, blood tonics, and herbal stimulants, created the illusion of invincible warriors, living proof of Rome's superiority. Writers compared them to demigods. Spectators swore they had the stamina of Mars himself. In truth, what the crowd was seeing was often the effect of performance enhancers. Pain-numbing opiates, focus-sharpening herbs, and mineral-rich tonics allowed gladiators to ignore injuries that would have felled ordinary men. When a fighter kept standing after a brutal gash, spectators believed they were watching a miracle. In reality, they were watching early sports science at work, but the myth didn't stop in the arena. Roman society was obsessed with consuming gladiators, sometimes literally. We've already seen how people drank their blood or ate parts of their body, believing it transferred strength. But even in life, gladiators' supposed superhuman vitality made them the subject of art, graffiti, and cult-like worship. Some gladiators were treated almost like celebrities, worshipped for their unbreakable nature. Wealthy Romans paid fortunes for gladiator sweat, yes, collected in vials, which they believed had erotic or healing properties. Women wore it like perfume, convinced it gave them allure. Imagine the irony. While the fighters themselves choked down bone ash and poppy tonics, their fans were lapping up the literal sweat of drugged men. But here's the twist. This myth of superhuman gladiators carried a dark cost. The very drugs that made them appear unstoppable were also grinding down their bodies behind the scenes. The myth of immortality was built on a foundation of very mortal suffering, and that brings us to the tragic finale of this bizarre tale. What happened when the drugs, the spectacle, and the myth finally collided with reality? Gladiators may have fallen nearly 2,000 years ago, but their strange relationship with performance enhancers left behind a shadow that still haunts us today. Because when you strip away the ash tonics, blood potions, and magic herbs, what you see in Rome is the birth of sports doping, a problem we're still grappling with in the modern world. Think about it. The core idea is the same. Push the body beyond its natural limits using science, substances, or superstition. In ancient Rome, it was bone dust, wine tonics, and opium. In modern times, it's steroids, amphetamines, and blood transfusions. The arena has changed, from sand and swords to stadiums and Olympic tracks, but the underlying story hasn't. Athletes, then and now, chase the edge that will make them unstoppable. The parallels are chilling. Gladiators were pressured by their lanista to perform no matter the cost. Today, athletes face pressure from coaches, sponsors, and entire nations. Gladiators consumed substances that wrecked their health in exchange for fleeting glory. Modern athletes risk organ failure, strokes, and disgrace from banned substances, all for medals, money, or a place in history. And just like the Romans mythologized their drugged fighters as superhuman, we do the same. Fans marvel at record-breaking sprinters, home run hitters, or cyclists who seem tireless. Later, when scandals break, Lance Armstrong, the East German doping programs, Olympic disqualifications, we realize the story isn't so different from Rome. Behind the spectacle is a human body pushed past its breaking point. But here's the most haunting connection. Gladiators didn't really have a choice. They were slaves or prisoners, forced into drugs and diets that often killed them. Modern athletes, on the other hand, often choose enhancement, fully aware of the risks. Yet in both cases, the system, the audience, the sponsors, the empire kept demanding more. Faster, stronger, no matter the human cost. So, when we look back at Rome's drugged warriors, it's not just a bizarre curiosity, it's a mirror. The amphitheater may be gone, but the hunger for superhuman performance at any cost remains. And that leaves us with the chilling question. In 2,000 years, will future historians look at our athletes the same way we look at gladiators, as tragic test subjects in humanity's endless obsession with victory? So, what can we take away from this bizarre tale of gladiators, gruel, and grim potions? At first glance, it's just another strange chapter in Rome's bloody history, a story of fighters chugging bone ash and opium wine before marching into the arena. But if you peel back the layers, it's something much deeper. The gladiators of Rome weren't just athletes. They were living experiments pushed to the edge of human endurance by a society obsessed with spectacle. Their superhuman image was a carefully crafted illusion, built on pain-numbing drugs, strange diets, and dangerous stimulants. The crowd saw gods of war, but behind the scenes, these men were breaking down one tonic at a time, and here's the nutty part. Their story is still ours. Whether it's a cyclist hooked up to an IV bag, an Olympian swallowing banned pills, or even the pressure we put on ourselves in our own smaller battles, the echoes of Rome remind us that the pursuit of greatness always comes with a cost. So next time you see a highlight reel of an athlete doing the impossible, think back to the gladiators, men who drank ash, swallowed poisons, and bled for glory under a blazing sun. Ask yourself, are we really so different, or have we just traded the Colosseum's roar for stadium lights and TV screens? Because in the end, history's nuttiest lesson is this: when humans crave victory badly enough, we'll risk anything, even our own humanity, to seize it. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed this bizarre dive into ancient Rome's gladiatorial drugs, hit that like button, subscribe for more strange stories from the past, and don't forget to check out our other videos for history's creepiest, weirdest, and most unbelievable tales. Until next time, stay curious.